the second Sunday of Easter. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. In the evening of that same day, the first day of the week, the doors were closed in the room where the disciples were for fear of the Jews. Jesus came and stood among them. He said to them, "Peace be with you," and showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were filled with joy when they saw the Lord, and he said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so am I sending you." After saying this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. For those whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven. For those whose sins you retain, they are retained." Thomas, called the twin, who was one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. When the disciples said, "We have seen the Lord," he answered, "Unless I see the holes that the nails made in his hands, and can put my finger into the holes they made, and unless I can put my hand into his side, I refuse to believe." 8 days later, the disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. The doors were closed, but Jesus came in and stood among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he spoke to Thomas. "Put your finger here. Look, here are my hands. Give me your hand. Put it into my side. Doubt no longer, but believe." Thomas replied, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "You believe because you can see me. Happy are those who have not seen and yet believe." There were many other signs that Jesus worked and the disciples saw, but they are not recorded in this book. They are recorded so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing this you may have life through his name. The Gospel of the Lord. Today's Gospel passage opens with the disciples, full of fear, locked away in a room. It's evening of that first Easter Sunday, and by now they had heard the message the women had given them when they returned from the empty tomb that morning. He is risen. They know of Jesus' resurrection, but fear stifles them. They don't believe the women. Jesus comes into this very situation of unbelief, proclaiming his peace. Showing them his hands and side assures them of his physical presence among them, and this assurance fills them with joy. The risen Jesus is the same Jesus they saw lifted up on the cross, whose side had been pierced with a lance. Their attitude changes. The mood is lifted and they respond with joy. They finally believe. His presence among them on that first Easter Sunday evening proclaims his victory over death. The tomb cannot hold him. Locked doors cannot keep him out. The message that they had heard earlier that day from Mary Magdalene has been confirmed. Unfortunately, they needed confirmation before they could believe. This gospel is not simply about a doubting Thomas. The focus of the passage is not on those who have a physical experience of the risen Jesus, which enables them to believe. It is more concerned with those who believe, who will come to believe without having had such an experience. Thomas was not present on that first Easter Sunday evening. When the others tell him that they have seen the Lord, he refuses point blank to believe. He is surrounded by Easter light, joy, and peace, evident in the other disciples, and yet he remains in the darkness of unbelief, the darkness of unfaith. The others try to communicate their Easter faith to him, but to no avail. He is only prepared to lay aside his unbelief if the risen Jesus meets his criteria. Thomas demands that Jesus be touchable. 8 days later, the disciples are still in the same house and the doors are still locked. The resurrection still hasn't impacted on their lives. But Jesus still comes and stands among them. They may have failed during the Passion. They may still be constrained by fear, but they have never been failed by the love of God towards them in Jesus. He had died for all of them while they were failing. He wasn't going to abandon them now. Jesus turns at once to Thomas and amazingly offers to fulfill the criteria that he had set down for believing. Jesus offers him his side and his hands. If Thomas wants physical proof that Jesus is risen, he can have it, but we can feel it. Something more is at stake here. The Gospel doesn't tell us whether Thomas actually touches Jesus or not. It would seem that his conditions for believing are forgotten as he sees, believes, and exclaims, "My Lord and my God." But he is not off the hook that easily, as the not too subtle rebuke from Jesus indicates. You believe because you can see me. Happy are those who have not seen and yet believe. In other words, do not be faithless, Thomas, but believing. All the Gospels show us how the early disciples, not without doubts and difficulties, made their journey of faith with the help of the physical presence of the risen Jesus. But their experience is different to ours, a faraway history for us who are called to believe without the advantage of Jesus' physical risen presence before us. So, how are we to believe? Jesus assures us in today's Gospel that we have been blessed, that we are happy, or should be happy, to have not seen and yet believe. We are to regard our situation in 2021 as equally privileged or even more privileged than those early disciples who needed to experience physically the risen Jesus in order to believe. Jesus reminds us that there is a quality of faith without sight that far surpasses that faith that brought about Thomas's eventual belief and that of those first disciples locked away in the upper room. We are blessed in our belief without seeing. We are the recipients of a faith that comes down to us from those first disciples who were at the same time filled with fear and joy. But to truly believe the crucified Jesus was raised from the dead means also believing that he is a living, powerful presence in the world and in my life. This belief must radically change the way we live our lives, the way we profess our faith, and the hope we entertain for ourselves and the world. Faith transformed those early disciples. It can do no less for us.